Every time I post a haircut, someone says, check your work in the mirror. What should I be looking for? So this is a question from one of our members in our community, and I wanted to make this video answering that because I think that a lot of people struggle with the same thing. So let's get right into it. So how to tell if you did a good haircut? Well, first I got to start with, it really doesn't matter what you think as a barber, in my opinion, whether you think it was a good haircut or not. The only thing that matters is if the client is happy and if they come back, period. That's my belief. You might not agree with me, but if the clients are coming back, it really doesn't matter how we feel about the haircut, right? Because I do haircuts all the time that I might not feel look that great, but the clients love it and they keep coming back. So ultimately, that's what matters, right? So the first thing, what are we looking for? Symmetry, right? So does the haircut look balanced? So this would be an example of an unbalanced haircut. The hair on the top is way longer than the sides, and the other side probably looks the same. And again, like a lot of people might want this, but some people might call this not a great haircut, right? Not a great style. So if you want to have a symmetrical haircut, then you want your sides to be somewhat even on both sides, and there should be a nice transition into the top. So this would be an example of a balanced haircut where you can see the lengths on both sides are pretty equal, and it kind of gives a nice symmetrical shape to the face. So the first thing we're looking for when we're looking for if we did a good haircut or not is when they face the client in the mirror, you want them to basically, not in every case, it depends on the haircut, but in a lot of cases you want to have the sides equal in length on both sides. So that would be like a symmetrical or balanced haircut. That's the first thing. So the next thing is the lineup, right? So if you're having a client who gets sharp lines in the front or even on the sideburns or just the neckline, here's an example of a bad lineup, right? So the lines are sharp, right? But you can see that it's off center, right? And the lines are not pointing, I mean, they are pointing in kind of the same angle, right? But they're not pointing, so in this case, the line points to the corner of their eyebrow, and this one points to the corner of his eye, right? So this would be some people might call this a bad lineup. I would call this a bad lineup, right? I don't know if this client asked for it or not, but I would not be proud of this lineup right here. So that's basically, everything in the haircut is almost basically symmetry, right? Are the lines pointing to the same place? So when it comes to making lines, I find it really helpful to have guidelines. So if I were making a line on this side, right, I would try to keep in mind where's my trimmer pointing when I am making this line. In this case, it would be towards the corner of his eye or his eyebrow, right? So when I go to the other side, I want to make sure that that trimmer is pointing the same way. And if you do that every time, you're going to find it a little bit easier to get more symmetrical lines. You basically have to have a guideline and making sure that you're following the guideline when you're making those lines. Same thing applies for the beard. When I'm doing the beard, I'm thinking about where am I going with that line? Is it going to the corner of his mouth, to the bottom of his lip? Like, it just doesn't really matter. It depends on the situation and what you're working with. But you want to have a guideline when you're making these things, so that way when you don't have to guess, right? Because that's one of the things that I struggle with when I was first learning how to do beards, is like the one side would always end up lower than the other side. Once I started using guidelines, just like when we're doing scissor cuts, they tell you create a guide, follow the guide. Same thing with using trimmer work, right? So create a guide and follow it. Super simple. And then this would be an example of a good lineup, right? So it's pretty straight in the front, as you can see, and the lines are pointing to almost the same spot. Maybe a little crooked here, but he might have did that just to make sure, because not everybody's hairline is like perfect, right? So sometimes you have to adapt the hairline based on what you're working with. So maybe this client wanted to keep the front darker here. It looks like there might have been a little bit of enhancements used. There's probably some Photoshop going on. That's probably enough. If you made it this far in the video, also remember this, that there is a lot of haircuts out there that are super edited, photoshopped, and you guys, I think it's unfair to new barbers to think that your haircuts should look like that, right? And it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try to do the best haircut you can, but just keep in mind that a lot of stuff that's out there on the internet, on social media, these videos are these haircuts are very heavily edited, right? So you can take a great haircut and make it look basically perfect if you know how to use Photoshop. So keep that in mind. Like if your haircuts don't look like what you're seeing on social media, it's not necessarily because you're not that good. It's just they took it to the haircut was probably already good, and then they took it to another level with like Photoshop or whatever sort of photo editing. So this looks like it might be an example of that. I don't know, but just keep that in mind when you're looking at this stuff, right? Don't be so hard on yourself. And then here's another example of what I think is a good lineup. So you can see that these lines are kind of pointing to the same spot on both sides. This line right here is pretty straight. So and then there's some color, there's definitely looks like some color enhancement going on to make that line a little bit sharper. And that either the trimmers are really sharp or they use some sort of powder or hairspray to make that white ash line right there. But I would say this is a good lineup. I'd be proud of this if I did that. So basically we're looking for symmetry. Again, are the lines pointing to the same spot? Also, are these corners the same, same length, right? Because even if they're pointing to the same spot, but one that C cup area is a little higher than the other, you have one side that's a little shorter than the other, it's gonna look off, right? So in this case, the length of the corners is almost identical on both sides, which is why it looks like a good lineup, right? So the next thing we're going to look at is the overall shape of the haircut. So you want to step back, assess it, because it shouldn't just look good from the front or the side or the back. Like you want the overall haircut to look great. So one of the best ways to do that is making sure that you're using you're choosing the right style for the client's face. So here's some examples. You can take a screenshot of this. You can pause the video, but basically there's different face shapes out there, and then there's certain styles that are more suited to that particular face shape. So you want to try to figure out what's the client's face shape that you're working with. If they're not sure, if they want you to recommend a style for them, then you can use this as a guide. This isn't like a hard rule, but some people, have a particular face shape or a certain type of hair texture, and they show you a picture and it doesn't really match, or that style would not be ideal for that. So don't be afraid to make recommendations to your clients as a barber. Now, you're going to have clients that still want it no matter what, even if it's not the best haircut for them. It doesn't matter, right? Because all that matters is, are the clients happy? That's really all that we care about at the end of the day, right? And then when it comes to like the little details, these are probably the things that I see barbers mess up the most. But little things like this, like I've had clients come to me that were new clients that stopped going to their last barber just because like little things like this, like the sideburns were uneven. And this is like a super, super easy thing to do and check in the mirror. So one of the ways that I like to make sure sideburns are even is first I have a guide, like what part of the ear am I using as my guide when I make these sideburns, right? So then keep that in mind. And then you turn them around. So you turn them sideways, right? So that you can see the sideburn that you just did in the mirror. And then when you're doing the other sideburn, you put this trimmer on the same exact spot relative to that spot on the ear. And then you make the line. And then you check it in the mirror. So you can look at, if they're turning sideways, you can see the mirror and you can see where your other sideburn is. And then you can check where you're working right now. And then you turn them and face them towards the mirror, and then you check, like, so you do this little number here, and you're just like, do they look balanced? And if not, go a little higher, right? But these are little things that a lot of barbers miss, and I think this right here, the last couple things that we're going to go through in this video, are the difference between just okay barbers and great barbers, is the little details that a lot of people miss, right? So super important one. Make sure sideburns are uneven, or make sure they're even, right? And then you want to make sure that there is a smooth transition. So we're looking for smoothness now, right? So if you're doing a taper, check that the taper is smooth, that there's no lines, no rough spots. So this would be an example of like a not smooth haircut, right? It looks pretty good starting at the bottom, but then there's just a big ledge right there. And so this could be easily solved with some clipper over comb work, some some clipper work. I mean, there's different ways. There's not like one way. That's, I think, one of the reasons why it's hard to learn how to cut hair, because there's so many different techniques out there on YouTube and social media that you just kind of have to experiment with each way and kind of figure out what's the best way for you. So there's like probably 10 different techniques that you can use to blend this hair in. I would probably go in with clipper over comb first, follow it up with guards, and then maybe do some trimmer, some texturizing shears just to make sure everything's blended. But you just figure out the best way that works for you. Not everybody's comfortable with clipper over comb or using clippers or scissors. You just kind of figure out the best way that works for you. But this is an example of like, it's not really blended in that well. And I actually think that there's no such thing as a bad haircut. I just think that there's unfinished haircuts, and that's basically it. Right? The haircut's just unfinished, and if it's a bad haircut, it's because the client didn't like it, right? Because there's sometimes you could do a beautiful haircut, but the client didn't like it, right? It could be the perfect fade, the best fade you've ever done in your life, but the client didn't even want a fade, or they wanted a low fade, not a high fade, or they wanted, a number one on the side, not a skin fade. So it doesn't really matter as barbers what we think is a good haircut. All that matters is the client happy? And then I think there's good haircuts, and then there's just unfinished haircuts. And a lot of times there's haircuts that look like this, right? That this could easily be turned into a great haircut. There's just a little bit more work to do. Same thing with this one right here, right? So this is an example of a haircut that's pretty close to being done. It's not too terrible, and I wouldn't be proud of this though. I wouldn't be proud of letting the client walk out of this. This client just has a few lines and dark spots right there. Just a little bit more blending would take care of that. So I would consider this just like an unfinished haircut. So when you're looking in the mirror, when you're checking your haircuts in the mirror, you want to look for stuff like this, right? The reason why we use the mirror as barbers is because it gives us a different perspective. Because especially if you've been working on the same client's head for like an hour, right? It's pretty easy. Your eyes can start to trick you, especially later in the day when you're tired. Like, oh man, this is starting to look really good. And then you look in then you check in the mirror, and you're like, no, not done yet, right? So you're looking at a haircut basically from the same perspective the entire time. So you look at the mirror to give you a different perspective of like what this looks like from a different angle. I've also seen barbers who never use the mirror that did great haircuts, but they always checked in some way, right? So the way they might have did it was, instead of looking in the mirror, they just take a few steps back and look at it from a different angle, Or you can take a picture or a video and see how it looks, because the camera doesn't lie, right? But either way, a lot of barbers use a mirror basically just to give them a different perspective, right? So it makes it a lot easier to check your work, to make sure you have the fade the same on both sides. I don't know if that's in this document here, but that's another thing that I've made this mistake, and I've seen a lot of barbers make this mistake. But when you're making that first guideline, when you're doing a skin fade, for example, make sure it's even on both sides, right? That's the most important part of the haircut, because you don't want to give the client like a low fade on one side and then like a high fade on the other side. Even if it's a great fade, it's an unbalanced haircut, right? So that's one situation where you can use the mirror in the beginning of the haircut. When you're creating that skin line, make sure it's the same on both sides. And then even when you're creating your guidelines after that, you want to make sure that they're evenly spaced, because otherwise you're going to end up with an unbalanced fade. And it could be a great fade, but if they have two different haircuts. They could have a high fade on one side and a low skin fade on the other side. So symmetry is like the main thing that people are looking for. Here's some other examples of like so this is technically like a blended haircut, right? We're not seeing like huge changes in lengths on the side, but in this case, this would be a more difficult case here because the client has dips in their head. So that's when you want to get in there with the clippers and maybe push down a little harder. You can grab the client's head and use your thumb to stretch the skin, so that way you can get in those dips. Because otherwise it's going to look like this, right? This could technically be like a blended haircut. Like this could be done, but sometimes you have to adapt to what you're working with. So what you want to do in this situation is do what either I just said, which is stretch the skin so you can get in those dips, or better yet, don't put the line right on the dips, right? Because it's very difficult to fade a line inside that. So either go lower than that when you're creating your line, or go above it, but try not to put a line right on those dips when you're creating your guideline for these types of haircuts, when you're working with clients that have dips in the back of their head like that. So this would be an example, I think, of a very smooth, very nicely blended haircut, right? So there's hardly, I mean, I don't really see a whole lot of flaws in this haircut, but like there's not a lot of dark spots, no lines that I can see. The hair is textured beautifully into the sides. So this is what you want. You want a nice smooth transition, no dark spots or lines. The hair on top flows nicely into the side. And that's basically what we're shooting for, right? We want a nice smooth blend, smooth transition. And then for textured or layered styles, you want it to make sure it lays correctly. Now again, it depends on the style, but this would be an example of this person doesn't look very happy with this haircut, right? And a lot of people might look at this and not be happy with it either, right? Because it's just kind of laying over the side. Now it just depends on the style, because some people, if they get an undercut and they want the sides shaved and they want it hanging over the side, then they might be happy with this, right? But in this case, it doesn't look like it's like that with that's what they're going for here. So this would probably, again, be solved with a little bit of clipper over comb or trimmer work, clipper work. But yeah, so you don't want this, basically. You don't want like just hair hanging over that's unblended. You want to kind of make it kind of smooth in and transition into the top so that it's a nice, even symmetrical blend on both sides of the head. That's not always going to be possible depending on the hair you're working with and the style that the client's going for. But in a lot of cases, that's what you want to shoot for. You want this to be more blended than this. And some clients can be difficult, right? Because some clients are like, can you take it shorter? Can you take it shorter? And then you end up, so you want to try to get into it, avoid a situation where clients are telling you how to cut their hair. And one way you can solve that is basically by like not having them face the mirror during the haircut, right? I like to face people in the mirror in the beginning during a consultation, and then I turn them away after that because I need the mirror at that point to start cutting their hair. And then you might have a situation in the future where you have clients who are like turning with the chair with their feet, which is annoying. If that's the case and you have one of those people, then you can lock the chair. Like if you just lift up on the foot lever thing on the bottom of your chair, it might lock the chair. Or you can drop the chair down so that the bottom of the footrest sticks to the floor and you can't turn it anymore now, right? But either way, it's like that's how one of the ways you can avoid having clients tell you how to cut their hair is if you don't let them see the mirror, right? Because some clients don't understand that you need room to blend their hair. So in this case, I think it's always the barber's fault at the end of the day. But so this client might have been telling the barber, hey, can you go higher? Can you go higher? And then it's like, well, now I don't have barely any room to blend this hair, So you want to try to avoid that situation. Sometimes you got to protect clients from themselves. Don't let them tell you how to cut their hair, and don't face them in the mirror the entire time. So that way you can do your thing, and by the time they do see it, it's all blended, right? And everybody's happy. So we're looking for also consistent lengths now, so making sure that there's no stray hairs. So this would be an example of a kind of inconsistent lengths, right? The hair at the bottom, there's some pieces that are a little longer, and then there's not like a smooth transition. It's kind of choppy. And some people might want this, right? Especially guys that are getting the top cut with scissors, they might ask you to texturize their hair, and it might look something like this. But in general, especially for this type of style, like you want it to be a little bit more consistent than this, right? So you want to try to avoid having the hair be super, super choppy. So one of the ways you can avoid this is by cross-checking. So if you're cutting the top of somebody's hair with scissors, for example, you can start at the front of their hair or the back, wherever you want, right? And then you cut it, and then you step to the side and you check the length that way. Because if you cut it one way, you cross-check it the other way. So if you cut from front to back, right, with the scissors, then you step to the side and you lift it up sideways And that way you can see if there's any peaks or uneven spots, and that's where you can check that. So you don't even have to be that good, I think, at scissor work, as long as you're good about cross-checking. So cut it one way, step to the side, check it the other way, or if you start with the side, check it from front to back, right? Either way, if you always cross-check your haircuts, especially scissor work, then you can make sure it's even most of the time. And then this also works with fades too. So in some of my YouTube videos, I do a lot of cross-checking with fades, which basically means like I basically fade up, right? So I start with, if it's a skin fade, I start with skin, then I go to the 1, then 2, and 3, whatever. But then I actually do the entire process in reverse, and it's basically acts as a form of cross-checking. So once I get to, let's say, a 4, I did a skin at the bottom, blended it up to a 4. Then I'll start with the 4 and work my way down to the 3, then the 2, then the 1, and going over the same spots in the same area, because it actually ends up picking up some of the hair that was missed, and it really smooths out the blend a lot more when you do that with every single haircut. Especially if you're working with clients that have straight hair. Like my hair is really straight, so if somebody doesn't like go over my hair again, chances are there's almost always going to be stray hairs left afterwards. And that's the thing, is like, you don't see the finished haircut really in the barbershop, right? The finished haircut is what it looks like after they go home, wash the product out, and take a shower, right? And that's when the clients make a decision whether it was a good haircut or not, because it might look beautiful in the barbershop, but when they get home, if there's a bunch of stray hairs that weren't cut, they're not going to be that happy with it. So you want to try to cross-check as much as you can. Don't miss stray hairs. Make sure that haircut looks great before they leave, and also when they get home and take a shower. Here's some other examples of dark spots. This would be a tough client to work on, but they're out there, right? So you can have some clients that have these massive dips in their head, and the only way to really get around this is to, one, like I said earlier, try to avoid putting lines right where those dips are, and then you want to stretch the skin as much as you can to get inside those areas. And then you want to, this is an example maybe of the barber went a little too high around the hairline, and the only way to really fix a bad haircut is to go shorter, right? So if the client wasn't happy with this, then what you maybe could do is do like a temp fade or something on the sideburns, or even give him like a low skin fade. But he looks like he has kind of naturally high arches anyways, and some people want that. Some people call it white walling, but a lot of people don't. So it's really just dependent on what your client wants. When it comes to making lines in general, you want to keep those lines as natural as possible. You don't want to go too far into the hairline, because it might look super sharp and great when they're in the shop, but 2 days later, when it grows back, they're not going to be happy with you. So want to keep your lines as natural as possible when you're making them. One way you can avoid doing this is, when I'm doing the trimmer work, I usually stop at the top of the ear. So I'll go in this direction, where I am starting here at the sideburn, cleaning up this area, and then I stop. And then I start here down at the neckline, and I go and I meet at the top right here. The reason why I do that is because in the past, I've tried to just go all the way around in just one direction, and that's how you can end up carving too deep into this arch area around the ears. If you're just trying to do it all in one shot, you could end up going way too far into the hairline. So I would recommend start on one side, meet at the top, then start at the other side and meet at the top. It'll hopefully prevent that from happening with you. And then when it comes to the neckline, if you go too high, like in this case, then you just want to recommend tapering. You can, believe it or not, you can fix this, but the only way you can fix it is by going shorter. So you just recommend a neck taper in that case. But when it comes to the neckline, start as low as possible, right? And then, because you can always raise it. And if the client's not sure, then this is the order what I would go in. Like if they're not sure how they want their neckline, this is the order I would go in. So you want to start with square, because it's the easiest one to start with. And if they don't like square, then you can go from square to round, just take the corners off. And if they don't like that, then just taper it, right? And then problem solved. There's no more hair there anymore. And then you, of course, you want to make sure your trimmers aren't too sharp, because you don't have to have super razor sharp trimmers on every haircut you do. And believe it or not, a lot of clients like me have sensitive skin, and I would not appreciate it if a barber was using super sharp trimmers on my neckline. So keep that in mind. You don't need to use your trimmers. Your trimmers don't need to be razor sharp. I would recommend having two. Have one that's set kind of close for those people that do like the sharp lines, where you do need like high precision type of work. And then the other one would be for everybody else, right? Kids, people that have sensitive skin, or just, you know, a regular tapered haircut like this. You don't need like super sharp trimmer lines. So that's how you can avoid having these like red marks right there. That's usually caused by your trimmers being too sharp, or the barber being very heavy-handed, or both, right? So that's like the worst combination, is if you have like trimmers that are way too sharp and a barber that's heavy-handed. So you definitely don't want that, right? If you're gonna use razor sharp trimmers, at least be light-handed when you're using them, okay? And then here's another example of a haircut that's not really like smooth. And it just basically looks like unfinished, right? So there's like this line right here, and there's a lot you can do to lighten that up, but basically just, you can see their original guideline basically. And you know, one of the things that I like to do when it helps to erase guidelines that avoids taking the fade too high, is basically you can either use the corner of the trimmer or the clippers. So use the guard. Typically when it comes to erasing lines, you want to use the same thing that you use to create the line. So in this case, let's say it's a number one, right? They use the number one to make this line, and you could go in there with a number one or the 1.5, and just go in there with just the corners and start knocking that line out. The reason why you use the corners only is because you can avoid making a new line. Because if you've ever struggled to do a haircut and it feels like the line is going higher and higher and higher, then it's probably because you're using the full blade, right? And you're cutting into your guide. Just like with if you're cutting doing scissor work on the top, if you keep cutting your guide, first of all, you're gonna get lost, and then it's gonna end up going shorter and shorter. So you don't wanna cut your guide. And a lot of this is usually caused by not giving yourself enough room in between steps. So if you give yourself enough room to get from like the number one to the 2 guard to the next guard, then you won't have issues with this as much as if you try to compress that fade. So if somebody's asking for, it depends on what they're asking for, right? You might have situations like if they want a really low fade that, you know, you can't give yourself that much room. But in general, like, you want to give yourself enough room to get in between steps so that you can avoid things like that, right? Another thing you can do is you can actually use texturizing shears to start to lighten these spots here with. So that's a great technique for, you know, basically blending out lines without raising the fade any higher. So I don't think texturizing shears should be used as a replacement for learning how to fade. But if you're in a situation where your haircut's almost done, you're almost at the end, but there's still some lines and dark spots, that's when you bring out the texturizing shears. And I usually use like a taper comb, like the combs that start up fat on one side and get skinnier towards the middle, because that allows you to get closer to the scalp. And you use your texturizing shears to basically lighten this up and smooth that out. And then this is a huge one that I see all the time, but barbers will just do these little details, you know, that clients, they notice this stuff, right? Because again, they're going home and they're showering and they're seeing everything that you missed. So you don't want to miss any hairs, like, at all. Like, especially if you do a skin fade, always check, or a head shape. Like, it's always check around the ears. There's 99% of the time when I see barbers, especially new barbers, do a skin fade and I check it, there's always hair left behind the ears. And it's such an easy thing to do. And the one thing I would say though with this, right, is don't do this with the trimmers, because it's very easy to irritate the client's skin where the ear connects to the head. Do that with a razor, right? And if you're not comfortable, then do it with the trimmers. But it's very easy to cut people, especially kids, with this area of the skin that connects to the ear to the head. So don't go with the trimmers in there. You're going to irritate it. You could cut them. It's actually safer, I think, to just hit that area with the razor. So, with our haircuts, it comes with a neck shave at the end of the haircut. So while you got the razor out anyways, just go ahead and check behind the ears, right? Make sure there's nothing left behind. And then last thing, I don't have an example photo of this, but like the haircut that should look good ideally without product. That's not always going to be the case. Some people just have tough hair to work with, but that's what we're shooting for. Like the product should just enhance whatever's there. So it shouldn't only look good with product. Some people, that's going to be the only way because their hair, that's just what you got. So you can only work with what you got, right? But ideally, like the haircut should look good with or without products. Same if you're using enhancements on the hairline. Like if you wash all those enhancement out, are the lines still going to look sharp? Is everything still going to look good? If not, then maybe you need to go back to working on the line work, because it should just be an enhancement. It should already be a good line, clean lines. And then the hair, if you just decide to use enhancements on the hairline, it should just act as that, as an enhancement. But it should not be basically painting on a hairline. Because again, the clients are gonna go home and they're gonna shower and they're gonna see the truth, right? It might look good in the shop, it might look good in photos, but what matters is that clients are happy with it and that they come back. So again, that's what we keep coming back to, because that's ultimately what I believe is that if the clients are happy and they're coming back, that's all that matters. It really doesn't matter what I think about the haircut. And you can tell that there's actually some body language cues that I look for to see if somebody is happy with their haircut. So if they keep looking in the mirror the entire time you're cutting their hair, either they're just like a high anxiety type of person, or maybe you're just doing something that they don't like, right? So be on the lookout for that. But if somebody is like, what I look for because I kind of turn people towards the mirror when I'm basically done, or where I feel like I've reached a good spot of the haircut. And the first thing I look for is I look for this. There's a little nod that a lot of guys do if they actually like approve of the haircut, and they might not say anything, but they might, when they see the mirror for the first time in like 20 minutes, I look at their head and their head movement, and sometimes they do a little nod like this, and that's why I'm like, got him. Yeah, I got that. He's happy with it, right? And then another thing is pay attention to their eyes, because if you don't see that head nod, their eyes are going to go somewhere, right? So maybe, or their head might even tilt. So they're like, watch where their eyes go and see, because that's the problem area, right? Because they might say they're happy with it, but what is their body language showing? So this is huge. This is something that I've learned a lot, because some clients will not say anything, and or because they don't want to hurt your feelings, or they just want to get out of there, right? But if you face somebody towards the mirror and they see their haircut and they don't seem happy, pay attention to where their eyes go, and then ask them, like, open it up. So if somebody looks at, this certain part of their head, and they might even touch it, right? And I'm like, is that short enough right there? Like, just open it up. Like, make him feel okay with like telling you, like, hey, can we go a little shorter here or whatever, And it goes a long way. It goes a long way with clients if they feel like they can actually coach you into how to cut their hair. Not how to cut it, but like basically how they like it, right? And then of course, when you do finally find a way that the clients like and that they're happy with, what I highly recommend is take notes on your clients so that you don't have to figure this out every single time that they come in, and take a picture too while it's fresh. You can take a picture with their phone. I recommend you take it with your phone and then you send it to them. So that way you can post it as content on social media, and then you have notes for the next time they come in. But you want to take a picture of it while it's fresh, and then you can send it to them, or you can just store it in their notes or on your phone. That way next time they come in, you know exactly what to do. And if you have pictures or videos in combination with written notes, that's very, very powerful, and it goes a long way in giving your clients more consistent haircuts, which ultimately, every survey we've ever done, clients mostly care about consistency. They'd rather take a slightly less quality haircut as long as it's consistent every single time. So watch for people's body language. Make sure that they are happy with the haircut. Watch where their eyes go when you turn them towards the mirror. And then before, of course, you want to always open it up. Like, is there anything you'd like adjusted? And even if they come back, right? And you want to, and then you cut their hair last time, it's totally fine to ask them, is there anything that you didn't like about your last haircut? Or is there anything you want to change about your last haircut? Even if you were the one that did it, because it kind of opens it up. It's because sometimes it takes a few haircuts to really figure out either how to cut their hair or how they like it or how they style it. So it's okay to ask, like, is there anything you didn't like about your last haircut? Anything you want to change? But the most important thing is, did they come back, right? Did they come back? That's it, right? If they came back, then that's all that matters. So it doesn't matter that you didn't think that this was the best haircut in the world, or that you think this haircut looks like shit, or that you don't like doing it. All that matters is, did they come back? And I'll throw this one in there too, but sometimes you can have a haircut that, you know, it was beautiful, but it took an hour, right? Or it took an hour and a half. And the clients might have been happy with the end result, but I can tell you, because I've seen it so many times, that if there is somebody else in the shop or in a different shop that can give the same quality haircut, but in half the time, you're going to end up losing that client at some point, right? Unless that client is super loyal to you because your personality, whatever, in general, like, this is a business and people are willing to pay nowadays for speed and efficiency. And if you are taking forever on these haircuts, then you're going to lose. You're going to lose to the barbers that can do the same quality, but in less time. So that's why I have a whole how to cut hair faster course in our Barbershop owner mastermind group. But hopefully you found this video helpful. I know this was a long one. There's just a lot. There's a lot to look for when you're facing clients in the mirror to tell if you did a good haircut. And if you want to ask a question in the community, and if it's a good question, I will answer it. This is the Barber Mastermind free group that anybody can join if they're a barber. Just go to skool.com/barber-mastermind. It's a free group for barbers and barbershop owners. So hopefully you found this helpful.